Bible is often held up for criticism today because, among other reasons, some of its content is so violent, especially in the Old Testament. If these stories were depicted in a Hollywood movie, it would easily earn an R rating for all the butchery and rape and genocide it contains. This content has led some folks to condemn the Bible as unworthy of respect in a civilized society. There are two responses I'd like to offer to this criticism. First, why won't we hold the New York Times, for example, to this same standard? The Times routinely documents accounts of human depravity that are disturbing to its readers, but I never hear of somebody canceling their subscription to the Times because of all the gruesome news in its pages. Of course, you could argue that the Times is simply reporting the news, not endorsing it. And that's quite true. It's not fair to smear the Times simply because the truth it's publishing is so unpleasant. It's simply showing us the world as it is, however ugly it may be. It's the same with the Bible. The tales of brutality and debauchery it depicts are simply a record of how people behaved in a more uncivilized age. In most cases, God is using that history to show the rest of us how not to behave. It's an historical lesson in morality and its consequences, and who could object to that? But you might respond, some of that violence God approved. In fact, in some cases, He ordered it. And that brings me to the second point I'd like to consider. Study carefully those cases where God was behind the violence. And there is often a backstory that puts His instructions in a more understandable light. Let's look at one example. God's instructions to the Israelites to destroy the Canaanites. God told Israel before they came into the land of Canaan, "You shall drive them out and destroy them quickly." Now that comes across as pretty ruthless, doesn't it? But dig deeper into the story and you'll find God's reason for this command. It is because of the wickedness of these nations that the Lord is driving them out from before you. God said elsewhere, "The land is defiled, therefore I visit the punishment of its iniquity upon it, and the land vomits out its inhabitants." There are many more details that we won't go into here, but here is the crux of the story. God was dealing with a people who were extremely depraved in their social behavior. They were a scourge on humanity. He had no choice but to eliminate them, and Israel was the tool of punishment He used. This act of divine judgment was not a Jewish pretext for exterminating people they didn't like, because years later, when Israel sank to the same level of depravity as their predecessors, God brought the same kind of punishment upon them at the hands of another military power for precisely the same reason. It wasn't pretty for them either. You see, in both cases, God was acting to cleanse the land of an extreme form of evil and to restore some semblance of moral decency in the human race. This example exposes a serious contradiction in the reasoning of those who attack the biblical concept of God. On the one hand, people reject the existence of God because of all the evil and suffering in the world. Yet when they read in the Bible of God actively stepping in to remove some of that evil, they reject that God also because, after all, He's so cruel. Now, think about the inconsistency here. People are blaming God for the evil that exists in the world, while at the same time criticizing Him for intervening to address that evil. Those two criticisms cancel each other out. There are really only two mutually exclusive options here. First, you can blame God for allowing evil in the world, but if you do that, you have no room to complain about Him punishing the very evil you detest. Or, number two, you can choose to criticize the stories of God punishing the villains in history, but if you do that, then you cannot criticize him for standing by and doing nothing while evil runs rampant in the world. If you embrace either one of those options, you have to reject the other. You cannot logically embrace both. Of course, there is a third option. We can accept that God exists and that for his own reasons he allows some suffering in this world, and that he has the right to step in at the time and place of his choosing to deal with evil when it exceeds whatever limits he has set. That's a fair and reasonable way to interpret the evidence. You see, we have to treat the biblical record with the same integrity we would bring to any other piece of historical documentation. We cannot force motives upon it that are not there. If we read it fairly and honestly, we'll learn some important truths about the world and our own personal role in it. This is David King with another episode of Beyond Grasping. Have a great day.